Humanity was once a thriving species. Cities stretched across continents. Technology was on the verge of a revolution. But it only took one day for it all to be destroyed. The truth is, no one knows how the world actually ended. Everyone has their own theory about who launched the first nuke. But the records are gone, the witnesses long dead. What we do know is that humanity didn't completely vanish. Most of it did, but a small number survived, sealed away inside bunkers. Over time, those isolated pockets found each other again, tapping out messages through old radar equipment and Morse code. And from those scattered survivors, an underground civilization slowly formed, one that today is believed to be the last trace of humankind. Deep beneath Europe, in cold tunnels carved through the Alps, a few thousand survivors endured. They built tunnels, cities, hydroponic farms, even their own railway system. Out of this, a democratic government would form, taxes, jobs, and a full economy would begin to build. And over about 2 centuries, 200,000 people grew from the darkness. Down here, a person is lucky to reach 40. There is no sun, food is thin, disease travels fast. And the one rule everyone accepts is simple: never go to the surface. Anyone who tries doesn't return. The old world is still up there, but nowadays, mutated animals rule it. The air burns your lungs. The sky itself feels poison. So for 200 years, humanity stayed underground, until now. Unseen by the public, the government had been planning something seemingly impossible: returning to the surface. For 2 years, they trained the people. New breathing methods, drills, how to use weapons, etc. And in the year 2222, the day finally came, later known as Surface Day. Government agents went door to door, showing up at every known address across the tunnels. Most people resisted. No one wanted to go to the surface. They all understood the risk. Going up meant you were probably going to die. But refusal wasn't an option. The government pushed forward anyway, and the tension exploded. Protests broke out, pockets of revolt formed, and entire districts refused to cooperate. In the end, only about half the population agreed, or were forced, to take part in Surface Day. Roughly 100,000 people. Keep in mind, this large group of people didn't rise to the surface from one area. They were scattered all over the place. Some rose from Moscow, some from Madrid, but the main center of population was in the Rhineland region. So naturally, that's where most people would rise from. All groups would stay in contact with one another, communicating what they were doing. Today would be the first time in 200 years that humans would officially rise from the underground. The air was horrible, but honestly, not as bad as you'd think. Mutated monsters had taken over the continent. Bears with extra arms, deers with 2 heads, and horrifyingly large hawks were the main predators. Encounters with these animals were basically instant, and they had no problem attacking humans. There was nothing people could really do, just defend themselves and learn from their mistakes as time passed. The government would officially declare themselves a nation, naming themselves the PAA, aka the Post-Apocalypse Authority. Their main mission was to restart civilization, but this time under one banner. Democratically, of course. Each group used whatever was left behind: rail yards, old housing blocks, tunnels that hadn't fully collapsed. Most of these places weren't safe. They were just survivable. Contact existed, but travel didn't. Radios were used constantly, mostly to warn others about dangerous areas or lost survivors. For the first few years, every group focused on staying alive rather than building anything long-term. Expansion happened slowly and without much planning. The Rhineland group moved first, pushing outward a few kilometers at a time. The Amsterdam group did the same from the north. Patrols cleared routes, marked danger zones, and abandoned areas that caused too many deaths. When the two groups finally met, it was treated as a huge achievement. It meant there was now a longer border to defend, but still, it proved that separate settlements could connect without collapsing. In the south, the Lisbon and Madrid groups moved toward each other for the same reason. Neither could survive alone. Their first contact nearly ended in violence. Seriously, at first, they couldn't get along, but later, they would set fixed routes and share supplies. Around the same time, the Paris and Rhineland groups connected, creating the first continuous stretch of controlled land. Movement became easier. This area slowly became the center of surface activity. Once surface life became permanent, the PAA held its first election. Only people living above ground were allowed to vote. Those still underground had no say. Hans-Peter Gunther was elected president. He wasn't too popular, but he was still the best candidate according to the people. His priority was control. Under him, decisions were centralized and enforced more strictly. With new leadership in place, the PAA shifted its focus. Expansion was no longer optional. Gunther would become the first expansionist leader. The advance into northern France was slow and costly. Cities were dangerous, filled with unstable structures and wildlife. Losses were common and rarely explained. By the end of this period, most of northern France was under PAA control. Paris became overcrowded and heavily guarded, functioning as both a population center and a command hub. From the south, the Nice group expanded inland and linked up with the Paris-Rhineland territory. Soon after, contact was established with Rome. Crossing this much land caused heavy casualties, but the route held. This created a single connected zone across Western Europe, which became the main base of power. As conditions improved slightly, people from the underground were brought to the surface. Around 20,000 made the transition. Many struggled to adapt. Some returned underground, others didn't survive. But for the most part, this would be a benefit. By this point, humans had learned how to deal with the wildlife. They understood which areas to avoid and how to respond when attacks happened. Losses still occurred, but not as often. The surface was still dangerous. People were just more used to it after 6 years. As the PAA expanded, differences between regions became harder to ignore. The Rhineland-Paris group grew more centralized and organized, while the Moscow group operated with more independence. Orders from the West were rarely followed. Communication still existed, but trust was thinning. Over time, it became clear the PAA was no longer one unified system. It was the same government on paper, but two very different regions had formed. In the southwest, the Madrid-Lisbon group expanded east and made contact with the Barcelona group. The connection was mostly practical. Trade routes were set up, patrols were combined, and borders stabilized. It reduced pressure on all three settlements. Further east, the Budapest group connected with Vienna. The route was dangerous, but short. Losses were limited, and the link held. Abandoned cities became the backbone of surface life. They already had roads, buildings, and markets. Paris grew into the largest hub, handling population movement, supply distribution, and administration. Cologne followed closely behind, acting as the main center for the Rhineland. Smaller settlements depended heavily on these cities, whether they wanted to or not. Tensions between the Paris-Rhineland leadership and Moscow increased when Gunther proposed linking Moscow to the nearby Kirov group. The plan was meant to unify eastern territories and bring them under more control. The mayor of Moscow refused. Publicly, the decision was framed as a safety concern. Privately, it was seen as a rejection of Western authority. But after that, cooperation between the two sides noticeably cooled. The Bern group attempted to connect with the Nice-Paris route through the Alps. It was the most dangerous expansion attempt so far. Terrain was unstable. 800 people died. Entire units were lost. The route eventually opened, but the cost shocked the PAA leadership. It forced them to acknowledge that expansion in the Alps was no longer an option. From Rome, expansion continued slowly to the east and south. The group avoided major risks, focusing on securing nearby territory instead of pushing for distance. Progress was slow, but the mayor of Rome continued pushing for more expansion. Despite earlier refusals, the Moscow group eventually connected with Kirov on its own terms. The route was established without approval from Paris. It strengthened Moscow's independence and further weakened Gunter's image as a strong president. In the west, the main group expanded along the French coast. Movement stopped once the Pyrenees were reached. The terrain offered little value, and losses began to outweigh gains. In the year 2234, Hans-Peter Gunter won re-election. His support came almost entirely from the surface population in the Paris-Rhineland region. Turnout was lower than before, and opposition was more vocal, but still, he won. Within the main group itself, tension grew between Paris and the Rhineland. Paris pushed for stronger central control, while the Rhineland favored regional authority. Over time, different customs, priorities, and identities began to form. People still followed PAA law, but loyalty was becoming local. The Rhineland groups expanded east and connected with Berlin. The city was heavily damaged, but its location made it valuable. It soon became another hub, both politically and for civilians. Amsterdam began pulling away from Parisian leadership. Local officials delayed orders, redirected supplies, and coordinated more closely with nearby settlements instead of the capital. It wasn't an open rebellion, but it was noticeable. In Central Europe, the Prague group collapsed completely. Contact was lost, and no survivors were confirmed. The Vienna mayor had disobeyed Gunter's orders to connect with the Prague group months earlier. This only grew tensions. Roughly 2,000 people were declared missing or dead. It was one of the worst losses since Surface Day. Near Nice, the PAA expanded slightly into southern France. Gains were limited, but stable. Leadership avoided further risks in the region by not expanding so much. By this point, the population balance had shifted. Around 60,000 people still lived underground. Roughly 150,000 lived on the surface. The underground was no longer the center of society. Many parts of it had become abandoned. Surface life, despite its dangers, had become normal. Most people no longer identified with the PAA as a whole. They identified where they lived: Moscow, Rome, Madrid, Paris, the Rhineland. The government still existed, but it felt distant. By the late 30s, expansion by civilians was starting to fail. Too many people were dying, and too many routes were being abandoned halfway through. The government finally accepted that if the PAA wanted to keep growing, it needed something more organized. That's when the first official army was formed. It was voluntary, and service was paid once it ended. For the first time since Surface Day, exploration and expansion were no longer handled by random civilians. Within 2 months, the force reached roughly 4,000 men. Once formed, the army was immediately deployed. Their first task was expanding into southern Germany, clearing routes and locating isolated survivor groups that had avoided contact with the PAA for years. Some joined willingly, others resisted at first, unsure whether they were safe or not. Either way, the region was secured, and the idea of military-led expansion quickly proved more effective than anything before it. As operations increased, the army was split into 4 divisions. 2 remained with the main Paris-Rhineland group. One was sent south to Rome, and another west to Lisbon after connecting up with. In Lisbon, progress was slow. Expansion moved carefully north and south from the city, with frequent delays caused by terrain and supply issues. Rome was different. Along the southern coast, movement was faster, routes were clearer, and problems were minimal. The contrast only showed how uneven the PAA had become. While the West reorganized, the Moscow group continued to go quiet. Messages went unanswered, and coordination stopped almost entirely. Expansion continued slightly to the south, but progress was minimal. Civilians were no longer being used for expansion, and without a formal army, Moscow simply lacked the means to push outward. Their isolation deepened. In the center, PAA forces expanded further around Berlin. The city's position made it strategically important, even in ruins. New routes were established, and nearby settlements were absorbed into the main structure. Berlin became less of a city and more of a base. Gunter won his second re-election by a larger margin than before. Support came mainly from Paris, where stability and growth were most visible. Other regions participated in his victory, but enthusiasm varied. Not long after, the PAA finalized its own nation. Paris was named the official capital. A flag was introduced, navy blue, with a golden eagle at the center. surrounded by 12 Bs. Each B represented a major region: Rhineland, Paris, Rome, Moscow, Amsterdam, Antwerp, Lisbon, Madrid, Nice, Vienna, Berlin, and Rome. The symbolism was meant to suggest unity through cooperation. In late 45, Gunther announced a major move: an expedition to Britain. December 18th was declared the official launch date. One ship set sail, carrying 120 soldiers and Gunther himself. Midway through the journey, the expedition encountered a violent storm. The ship never reached its destination. Wreckage was never found, but they never made it back. Hans-Peter Gunther was dead. The PAA was suddenly without its leader. Power passed to his son, Isaac Gunther. Unlike his father, Isaac showed little hesitation. His first decision was to abandon plans for Britain, calling the risk unjustified. Next, he attempted to reopen communication with the Moscow group. The response was mixed. Some messages were returned, others ignored. Nothing concrete came from it. Before the end of 48, Isaac focused elsewhere. The main PAA was finally connected to the Vienna-Budapest region, tightening control over Central Europe. Isaac Gunther was definitely different than his father. He was calmer, more approachable, and less interested in authority. But his goals were no smaller. Isaac believed Europe should be unified under one democratic government, even if that unity had to be forced in some way. Unlike Hans-Peter, Isaac framed expansion as protection rather than control. He spoke often about stability, safety, and long-term survival. To many, he seemed fairly reasonable. Another wave of people left the underground and moved to the surface. Around 15,000 emerged within a few months, stretching resources but strengthening surface settlements. By this point, roughly 200,000 people lived above ground, while only 40,000 remained below. Population trends were impossible to ignore. On surface day, humanity stood at around 200,000. By 28, it had fallen to 180,000. Now, for the first time since the apocalypse, the total population had climbed to roughly 245,000. Out of nowhere, the Amsterdam region officially unified with Antwerp, merging their local governments into one administration. On paper, the move made sense, simplifying trade and security. In reality, the people did not feel united. Cultural differences had grown too deep. Within 2 months, protests and local resistance forced the government to reverse the decision. The regions separated again, restoring their old administrations. The split calmed tensions, but it exposed how fragile unity had become. In 54, Isaac won the election. The margin was all right, but not crazy good. Most of his support came from Paris and Amsterdam, where his leadership had brought visible benefits. Elsewhere, enthusiasm was noticeably weaker. As the nation grew, regions began redrawing their internal borders. These lines defined authority, taxation, and military responsibility. Disputes did arise, but most were resolved without violence. Isaac turned east next, ordering an expansion into northern Poland. The region was largely empty, offering little resistance besides some rogue mutated animals. He declared the area the Prussian region and encouraged settlement. Around 3,000 people were paid to move there and start new communities. The strategy worked quickly. Roads were cleared, supply routes established, and basic governance installed. The region became functional within a few years, reinforcing Isaac's belief that controlled expansion was the future. Attention then shifted west to France. Coastal areas were already under loose control, but the interior remained untouched. Isaac sent 3 divisions to secure the rest of southern France. The operation was meant to be quick, but progress was slow. Shortly after, 2 divisions were sent into northern Italy. Their objective was to connect with the Milan Group and secure industrial ruins in the region. The advance was steady and mostly safe. By the end of the operation, the connection was complete. Relations with Moscow continued to look up. Isaac treated them more respectfully than his father had, avoiding direct confrontation. Still, he did not prioritize diplomacy. Expansion remained his focus, and Moscow remained distant. In Iberia, Isaac committed 4 divisions to a major push. Forces secured the entire eastern coast and moved north along the western shoreline. The operation stretched supply lines but succeeded. Funny enough, the 3 regions in Iberia would unify soon after this. But within only 2 weeks, not only would they break apart, more regions would come out of it.
Bruh.
In Central Europe, the PAA finally expanded into Prague, the region that had gone silent years earlier. Investigators found no signs of outside attack. Shelters were damaged from within, and supplies had been destroyed deliberately. Evidence suggested widespread internal fighting. The official conclusion was infighting. Civilians appeared to have turned on one another until no one was left. No confirmed survivors were found, and the region was quietly absorbed. When the next election arrived, Isaac was expected to win again. Instead, he lost by a narrow margin. Liam Lamprecht secured victory, drawing most of his support from the Rhineland and Berlin regions. The result shocked Paris and marked a major political shift within the PAA. Liam Lamprecht followed the same path as the presidents before him, but with more caution. He still believed expansion was necessary, though not at the pace Isaac had pushed for. More than land, Liam cared about keeping the nation together. He openly acknowledged that regional cultures had grown apart, and that unity was no longer guaranteed. Instead of denying the divide, Liam spoke about it directly. He framed the nation as a shared project, rather than a single identity anymore. Some people respected the honesty, others saw it as weak. Either way, he was in charge now. Although Isaac had officially canceled all plans to reach Britain, Liam quietly revived the idea. He set May 8, 63 as the planned sailing date. The decision was framed as long-term planning rather than immediate action. Most people didn't totally care, seeing it as a distant thing. Expansion continued, but in smaller steps. PAA forces moved into parts of modern-day Czechia, Austria, Hungary, and southern Poland. The gains were modest and often slow. Still, borders shifted, and the map continued to change. Liam initially took a hard stance toward the Moscow region. He attempted to enforce stricter coordination and compliance with central decisions. The response was immediate and hostile. Moscow cut nearly all communication with the West, maintaining only what was absolutely necessary. Despite their resistance, Moscow still had no military divisions of its own. The central government had never authorized them. And even in defiance, Moscow followed that restriction. It was one of the few orders they continued to respect. By this point, the PAA lacked a clear ideology. It was democratic, sure, but not fully in practice. Liam moved to formalize the system, declaring the nation a democratic monarchy. The title of president was replaced with king, still elected every 10 years. Alongside this change, a national assembly was created. It was meant to balance regional voices with central authority. The move reshaped the government, adding in a lot more of the people's voice. From the Prussian region, Liam ordered an expansion south into central Poland. The operation pushed steadily toward the Warsaw Group. Contact was made after months of movement. Warsaw was incorporated soon after and made a major region. The addition strengthened the eastern territories. It also increased pressure on relations with Moscow. The borders were getting closer. When the long-awaited day for Britain approached, Liam hesitated. He postponed the operation by 2 years. Secretly, the whole thing has been political. He never was actually going to go to the Isles on the planned date. The decision came during his re-election campaign. Instead of helping him, it damaged his credibility. Many saw it as a broken promise rather than a smart move. Liam lost the election by a clear margin. Yasha Odyssey emerged as the new king. He was younger than any leader before him, and the first to be born on the surface, not underground. That alone made him stand out. Yasha's support came primarily from the Moscow region, where he was from. He also drew massive backing from Gen's surface, the first generation raised entirely above ground. Yasha Odyssey entered office with a perspective no leader before him had. Unlike the previous kings who came from Paris or the Rhineland, Yasha was from Moscow. The rivalry between Moscow and the western regions had never faded, and his election only intensified it. Many in the West saw his rise as Moscow finally taking control. Yasha had little interest in expansion. His focus was unity, but not the patient kind. He believed the nation had grown too wide for its own good, and he intended to force unity where it had failed. One of his first moves was economic. Yasha cut major funding to regions that lacked strong ties with Moscow. Paris, Amsterdam, and several other Western regions were hit the hardest. Officially, the cuts were labeled as rebalancing. In practice, they felt like punishment. Infrastructure projects stalled, local governments struggled to function, and resentment spread quickly. His message was clear, even if it was never said out loud. For the first time, Moscow was granted its own military force. 2 full divisions were authorized to form under direct royal oversight. Within months, they were deployed southwest. Land near the modern Russian-Belarus border was secured with little cost. The expansion strengthened Moscow's position within the PAA. It also changed the balance of power. Regions that once dismissed Moscow now had to account for its growing influence. Over here, one other division was sent to modern-day Denmark. It moved into southern Danish territory and crossed by sea to Funen. Half of the island was taken before costs hardened. The operation marked the nation's first successful overseas expansion in decades. Yasha formally ended all remaining plans to reach England. He called the idea pointless and far too costly for a fractured nation. Most civilians agreed. After years of delays, Britain had lost its symbolic value to the PAA. Not long after, Yasha made his most controversial decision. Moscow was declared the second capital of the nation. Paris would remain the democratic and administrative capital. Moscow would become the royal capital. Public reaction was mixed. Most civilians didn't care that much. Inside the government, especially in Paris, the response was far more hostile. Many saw it as a deliberate shift of power eastward. Yasha also declared Surface Day a national holiday. The date marked humanity's return to the surface after 2 centuries underground. But truthfully, many people already treated it as a holiday. The declaration only made it official. Yasha ruled harshly over regions like Paris, Nice, and Amsterdam. Moscow and the Rhineland, however, were treated with restraint and favor. The imbalance did not go unnoticed. Within the National Assembly, debates grew heated, and votes always stalled. Trust between representatives basically vanished. The economy suffered more than it ever had before. Trade between regions slowed or stopped entirely. Tax systems broke down as local governments resisted central control. These new laws did not satisfy the economy at all. Resources piled up in some regions and were starved in others. Smuggling increased, black markets reappeared, and the PAA would go into its first depression. When the next election arrived, he ultimately lost by an extremely narrow margin, since so many people from Moscow and the Rhineland loved Yasha. But still, Francis Enzo, a candidate from Paris, emerged victorious. The results stunned the Moscow bloc. Francis stood for the opposite approach. He believed unity could still be achieved, but not through pressure or punishment. He presented himself as a peacekeeper, tasked with holding together a country that is starting to really not like each other. Francis Enzo moved quickly to undo much of Yasha's rule. He repealed funding cuts, lifted restrictions, and ended policies that openly targeted specific regions. Paris, Amsterdam, and much of the Western nation recovered almost immediately. His popularity in the West surged. To many Western regions, Francis felt like relief. Trade resumed, infrastructure projects restarted, and for the first time in years, the West felt stable again. In Moscow, the reaction was the opposite. Yasha's rule had elevated the region, and Francis's reforms felt like a direct loss of power. Moscow officials openly criticized the new king and questioned his authority. Orders from Paris were ignored more than ever. Communication became rare and hostile. Most of the time, Moscow operated independently, acknowledging the PAA only when they absolutely had to. Expansion continued in Iberia with little issue. A few divisions secured the entire northern coast. Cost was minimal, and supply lines held. It was one of the last expansions that went smoothly. Francis later delivered a speech that would define his rule. In it, he stated that he would respect the will of every region. He added that if a region chose to leave, he would not force it to stay. The statement spread rapidly across the nation. In many regions, it was praised as honest and humane. In Moscow, it was taken as confirmation that separation was now possible. Rather than expand further, Francis focused inward. He invested heavily in infrastructure, starting with cities like Paris, Rome, and Cologne. Transportation routes were rebuilt, housing expanded, and power systems stabilized. Electricity had blown up recently. Before it was only for the rich, but now things like light bulbs were seen everywhere. Over the following years, dozens of cities received similar treatment. Militarily and politically, little else changed. Francis didn't do much until the next election. When the next election arrived, Yasha ran again. The race was closer than anyone expected. Francis won, but barely. In Moscow, the loss hit hard. It confirmed their growing belief that the PAA no longer represented them. For many there, the idea of staying was no longer guaranteed. It did not take long for Moscow to act. Only 28 days after Francis won re-election, the Moscow region formally announced its secession from the PAA. The declaration was direct and final. A new state was proclaimed, the Kingdom of Moscow, with Yasha Odyssey named king. Francis responded exactly as he had promised. He addressed the decision publicly and acknowledged Moscow's right to leave. He expressed regret and warned of instability, but he made no attempt to stop it. No troops were moved, no orders were given. To many, that moment felt unreal. For decades, Moscow had been a problem, but it had always remained inside the system. Now it was gone, officially and peacefully. The PAA had just lost one of its largest and oldest regions without any resistance. With Moscow gone, something broke inside the rest of the nation. The idea of leaving no longer felt impossible. Francis had proven that secession would not be met with force. Every region began to reconsider the PAA. Local leaders started holding private meetings. Regional assemblies debated independence openly. What had once been unthinkable was now a viable option. The next blow came quickly. The Rhineland announced its departure, forming the Kingdom of the Rhineland. Unlike Moscow, the decision shocked the West. The Rhineland had been one of the foundations of the PAA since the beginning. Its departure removed any illusion of stability. If the Rhineland could leave, then no region was bound by history or loyalty anymore. The collapse had momentum now. Over the next 2 years, the PAA unraveled completely. Dozens of regions declared independence, one after another. Moscow and the Rhineland were exceptions, leaving as unified states. Most others fractured on the way out. For example, Rome split into multiple kingdoms. The Kingdom of Rome, the Northern Roman Kingdom, the Kingdom of Umbria, and the Kingdom of Milan. Rome's region shattered into smaller ones. Madrid followed a similar path, breaking into competing states. Berlin, Prussia, and countless others dissolved into newborn countries. The new map of Europe became unrecognizable. Throughout all of this, the PAA said very little. Francis stopped addressing the public altogether. He remained in Paris, governing what little remained of the state. By the end, the PAA was no longer a continental power. It had shrunk into the Paris region alone, effectively controlling only northern France. Stability eventually returned, but at a much smaller scale. What had once ruled nearly half of Europe now barely ruled itself. The world that emerged after the collapse was fractured beyond recognition. 52 nations now existed where the PAA once ruled. Languages, culture, and political systems drifted fast, even between neighbors. The first major war came from the lowlands. The Kingdom of Amsterdam declared war on the Antwerp Republic, citing border disputes and security concerns. In reality, Antwerp was small and weak. Amsterdam's forces moved quickly through the countryside with little resistance. Antwerp held firm at the city itself. Urban defenses slowed the advance, and for weeks, the fighting stayed within the outskirts. But the difference in manpower and equipment was impossible to overcome. Once Amsterdam broke through the inner defenses, the capital fell. With Antwerp lost, the Republic collapsed. The government surrendered within days. Antwerp lost only a small strip of land, but its independence was gone. It became a puppet state under Amsterdam, its army disbanded and its foreign policy gone. Across the continent, expansion into abandoned land became common. Dead cities and empty countryside were claimed with little opposition. Borders quietly shifted year after year. Most of it went unnoticed. Two states stood out. The Kingdom of Moscow pushed aggressively into the east and south, reclaiming territory with organized settlements and military divisions. The Kingdom of Budapest did the same along the Danube and surrounding regions. rebuilding control before someone else could hold it. In Italy, tensions finally turned into open war. The Northern Roman Kingdom invaded the Kingdom of Milan, expecting a fast collapse. Their forces advanced deep, taking nearly half of Milan's territory within weeks. It looked decisive, but Milan didn't fall. Supply issues slowed the Northern Roman advance, and local resistance hardened. Milan regrouped and began pushing back, retaking towns piece by piece. The front stabilized, and neither side could break through. After 4 months of stalemate, exhaustion set in. Milan agreed to cede a small border region to end the war. The Northern Roman Kingdom accepted, unable to push further. The war ended without a big victory. It just made the Northern Roman Kingdom look rogue, especially hurting relations with its southern neighbor, the Kingdom of Rome. France moved next. The Sixth French Republic invaded the Kingdom of Greater Luxembourg with overwhelming force. The campaign was fast and one-sided. Luxembourg's defenses collapsed almost immediately. French troops occupied the country within weeks. France took a small amount of territory along the border, just enough to justify the invasion. The rest of the kingdom was left intact. Greater Luxembourg was turned into a puppet state. Its government remained, but turned into a republic. France controlled its military, borders, and diplomacy, another nation becoming a puppet within the Benelux. War began in Iberia when the Kingdom of Lisbon invaded the Kingdom of Madrid. Lisbon's forces moved quickly along the coast, seizing ports and cutting Madrid off from any trade. Madrid resisted hard inland. The front stabilized as both sides dug in, unable to gain much ground. The fighting dragged on for 2 full years, draining resources without any real victory. Civilians fled contested zones, and the war just became a slow grind of each other's manpower. Eventually, they started negotiation. Madrid agreed to cede some northern territory and much of its coast, but only on one condition. It would retain a tiny stretch of shoreline, barely enough to hold one port. Lisbon accepted, ending the war with Lisbon cutting Madrid in two. After Francis would pass away because of a stroke, new leadership came in. The PAA officially changed its name from the Post-Apocalypse Authority to the Paris Apocalyptic Authority. It was an attempt to preserve legitimacy, to suggest they would continue the fight rather than collapse. Outside Paris, few cared. Most of Europe had already moved on. The Sixth French Republic, the Republic of Greater Luxembourg, and the Kingdom of the Rhineland formed a coalition and declared war on the PAA. For the first time ever, Paris faced invasion. After being declared war on, the PAA struck first. Its forces pushed southwest, overrunning nearly half of France's western regions in a desperate counteroffensive. For a brief moment, it looked like the authorities still had strength left. That ended when Rhineland troops arrived. They forced PAA forces out of French territory. The advance was slow and costly, with fierce resistance at every major settlement. After months of fighting, coalition forces reached the outskirts of Paris. The city prepared for siege. Supplies ran thin, morale collapsed, and there was honestly little hope for the defenders. And so, before the coalition could take the city, the PAA surrendered. Under the terms, it ceded land to the Sixth French Republic and a smaller portion to Luxembourg. It agreed to pay the Rhineland $45 million over 5 years and formally recognized the independence of a new Normandy state.